In any life, we have highs and lows, light and dark, wins and losses. What happens when we encounter that moment in time when what happens next could change everything? Join us as we step into another person's inspirational moment and see how we can connect their experience to ours. This is Greg Stevens, and you're listening to A Shot of Inspiration. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of A Shot of Inspiration. We're so glad to have you here. Join us again. I'm Greg Stevens, your host, and today we have a person I met about 5 years ago, and I met her in Houston, Texas. I was teaching a Crucial Conversations class, and she stuck around for the entire class, and she was trained to train it. So she's a certified trainer of Crucial Conversations as well. And we just hit it off in class. Some people you just have a connection with, and we had some really deep discussions about diversity, equity, and inclusion that we didn't think was going to happen in the class. And some people are scared of those conversations. I'm not at all. I love to lean into them to understand where people are and try to connect. But my guest today is Kisha Scott. And Kisha, welcome to the show. Thanks for being on.
I'm excited to be here. And like you said, we had formed a connection very early on, and I made for certain that I kept that connection going. I think you're a pretty awesome person. So it
Thank
just shined through the class when you're facilitating. So happy to be here and excited to be.
Thank you. And Keisha, what inspired me about you was just your presence, who you are being on a regular basis, and the conversations, the depth of conversations we had. And since then, I've gotten to know you even more. You've moved from Lincoln Financial when I met you over to Cushman and Wakefield. And you're in a leadership area where you're in charge of training and development? Is that what it is?
I went from being over enterprise learning and development at Lincoln Financial, and I didn't shift gears too much. Some people say I did, but I didn't. But now I'm in really focusing on talent development and developing talent strategies to make sure we have strong succession benches and things of that nature. So I'm still working very closely with learning development. I think my learning development expertise has really helped me, but it's also allowed me to just branch out a little bit and really get into the coaching. And that's where crucial conversations come in. And I love that I reached out to you and you were just right on it. And you've been a great coach for me. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. Well, Keisha, tell us about your career, how you got started, where you went. We were just talking about a situation a second ago. I'd like you to kind of hit on that because I love that you had some passion around that.
Yeah, I
And
do always have passion
we
about
get,
things that annoy me.
that's
But
great.
it's all good. No, so ironically, I went to school for social work, sociology in particular, and I wanted to be a social worker. And I started out in New York, and I was getting burnt out really fast. I don't know if my heart wasn't bleeding enough, it was bleeding too much, but either way, it stressed me out. And someone just saw something in me. It was like, hey, I want you to, we were implementing this new software. And I was like really in tune to the technology. And it was like, how about you train this? And that's where it came from. And I so started training and I started doing learning and development. And one thing that I loved is seeing people have that aha moment, and so they'll have something complex, and to break it down where people actually get it, it's rewarding and it helps you and it drives you and it motivates you. And so I think most of my career, I've been in L&D and talent and development. I say 20 plus years now because it's really over almost closer to 30 now. So I'm trying to preserve my youth. And but that being said, I spent a lot of time in the 9 to 5 realm, not in leadership roles, but always people always encouraging me to be in leadership. And so when I was at Lincoln Financial, I decided my youngest was in high school. And I had a really heart-to-heart conversation with my husband, and he was like, it's your time. And so I really put the pedal to the metal, and my career, as someone told me, took off. And the thing we were talking about earlier is I had a vendor come up to me and say to me, oh, I looked you up on LinkedIn and your career took off. What happened? And I told Greg, I was like, hey, that really annoyed me, as if I didn't have control of my career taking off, as if I wasn't in the driver's seat of my career path. I always was in the driver's seat. I've always been very careful about the jobs I took because I really wanted to, number one, work from home, which I have since my youngest is 18 and I've done it since he was 2. I
Wow.
thought it was really important to be there for him. And also because I just wanted to dedicate that time to my family. And my husband and I had a conversation. It's like time to take off. So I just put my skills that were already there. So it wasn't hard, right? It was like, okay, now I'm ready. And I spoke up and I said, this is what I want. And I'm ready. And I was the head of enterprise learning in Lincoln Financial. And now I am the head of talent development in Cushman and Wakefield, and I support two organizations that's probably well over 50% of the 50,000 employees at Cushman. So I think my scope is getting bigger. My jobs keep challenging me, but most importantly, I'm in the driver's seat.
Right.
And I think that's why I like my job so much when I'm doing coaching, when I'm talking to people. It's like, you got to get in that driver's seat. You have to decide what's best for you at the right time. And you really got to think about it. And sometimes you got to be selfish about it.
I think we're all selfish at that level. You either own your selfishness or it owns you. There's really no middle ground in there. And usually, when you don't own that selfishness, because there's times that self interest is important. And there are times when, if you don't own it, it will own you. And it typically does at the worst time possible.
Yes,
And
it doesn't it?
yeah, it does. And that's your blind spot. And that's just
Mm.
until you own it, you do have that blind spot. But what I love is when we talked about that, you're like, I'm in the driver's seat. Yeah, you had different priorities and you knew you could take your career where you wanted to. And some people don't have that mindset. And that's the
And when
self,
I wanted to, and when I
exactly.
wanted to.
And that's the
Hmm.
self-limiting belief so many people have is, oh, I can't do this because of someone else or because of this. And that's just a limiting belief that people have that they can either get past or not. And how was that something you always had with you, or is it something that maybe with that aha moment that you had somewhere along the way is, no, this is my choice?
No, it's funny you say it because this conversation has happened organically. I love it. I grew up in Bronx in the housing projects, and I've always had this grit and this tenacity that I'm going to be something other when people expect me to be, right? And so it's always been my motto in life, just be something other than what people expect you to be. My mom has always told me, you got to be more than what you look like. And just to stand up and stand in who I am as a woman, stand in who I am as a Black woman is very important to
Yeah,
me. And stand in where I come from, right? And be proud of it and wear it as a badge of honor. I've never been ashamed. I've never hid my hand, as to say, and my roots. I come from a very challenging childhood and difficult upbringing. But I use that. I've always used that as something to drive me and not take on the family shame as my own and just separate myself from that. And
yeah,
that's hard as when you're growing up and you're trying to figure out who you are. But I've always felt like I had a good sense of self. I always felt like I knew where I was going and what my purpose was in life was. I didn't know what I'd be doing, right? Because as a child, I wanted to be a lawyer. Everyone called me a Philadelphia lawyer. And that's just because I argued all the time, and that's probably difficult. But I think in my mind, I knew that I was going to be okay. That was just a mantra that I always said, even when I was not okay, it was like, you're going to be okay.
yeah,
You're going to be okay. And I just felt like I've always had, besides myself, something or someone watching over me.
yeah.
And so that's where I think that comes from. It's just I've always wanted to be in control and charge, and not, some may call me controlling, but I think it was just important for me. That was my form of discipline.
Yeah,
And so I
yeah.
think of it like I never was into, I always look at my nieces who are athletes. My son was an athlete, and I'm like, God, how do they wake up every day and do that and work out? But I can relate because it's just find something that drives you, whatever it is, and stand in it and be disciplined about it.
Yeah.
And so I've been disciplined about my to-do list, so to say.
I love that because you're talking about people are athletes. One of the things I find, if you love what you do, That's the thing, and it doesn't have to be athletics. It can be anything.
Hmm.
Got a friend of mine, he's in his mid-40s. He loves insects. He runs around and looks at insects in a certain way that I would never, a kid, let alone an adult. But what I also hear in that is, who inspired you to actually own that piece of you? Was it one, was it 2, 3 people as you were growing up? Well, who did you look to say, "That's where I'm going. That's what I wanna be"?
You know what's interesting? I get this question asked of me often, and I don't really have instantly when people ask me that, right? I think of people either think of their parents or they think of someone famous. And neither one, right, inspired me, but when I really
Yeah,
think about it, it was my grandmother, right? She was the one person, she was the most non-judgmental Jehovah's Witness I've ever met in my life. She's very religious and but she always accepted, and I don't mean all Jehovah Witnesses
right.
are judgmental, but she was just my grandmother was really accepting of people, and she met people where they are and
Yeah.
she accepted them. And I think when you accept people, I think she related to people, connected people on that human level
Mhm.
where she just respected everyone and she loved everyone and she didn't have a mean bone in her body and she
Yeah.
just loved on me. And I think in turn I learned how that love feels and how it motivates people and how it drives people. Like I said, I didn't have a good childhood, but her house was my safe haven. And she lived in the Bronx with me growing up. And I would take the bus at a young child, like I think very young. I was on the bus at 8. Every time my parents would get on my nerves or upset me, I would get on the bus and I would just sit on her edge of her bed. And she would just say something to me that inspired me and motivated me to think and to do something different than maybe what I had in my immature mind at the time, right? I'm going to run away. And she was like, okay, let's just think about this, right? So she's that one person. She was just full with love and respect for humankind.
Yeah. When you said that, when I asked the question, I was like, "Oh, that's a good one for me." So I didn't have any one person that really thought that. I had 2 coaches, one from my freshman, sophomore year, and another from my junior, senior, that just took interest in me. And, they allowed me to become and
Need to
what
become.
right, it allowed me to become what I was choosing, and boy, I would work to the bone for those 2. I would do anything for still my mentors internally today, but I love that was your grandmother, you had that close connection with her. So let's say so you grew up in the Bronx, when you left, where did you land, college? Where did you go after that?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. I grew up in the Bronx, and I would on my journey from where I lived in the Bronx to my grandmother's house, I would pass this place. And it was such a beautiful place, I thought, but it was all surrounded by trees. I didn't know what it was, and it would be on my route on my bus. And I spent a lot of time with my grandmother. And so I was like, what is it? As I got older, I learned it was a college. It was Fordham University in the
Okay.
Bronx. And so it's in the one of the worst parts of the Bronx, which as we know, most schools are in one of the most hard written areas. And as I got older, I was at Stevenson High School in the Bronx, and I always wondered what happened to students who didn't get good grades because we were very well protected, and everybody was like, "How is it going to school and in an urban area and it's not so great?" I'm like, "Look, my friends and I, we were very much protected. We would be brought into these little rooms. They were just focused on making us college bound and making sure we get in good schools." And so I remember asking one of my teachers, I was like, what's that school right off of Fordham Road? She was like, Fordham University? And I'm like, yes, I think I want to go there. She goes, do you know anything about it? Didn't know anything about it. But I just knew it was beautiful. It was so different, right? It was in the middle of the heart of crime and all this other stuff. But when you go in these gates, it was beautiful. And I never got a chance to go in those gates and I wanted to go. So I went to Fordham University. And so she was like, it's a hard school to get in. And I was like, don't worry about it. I'm going to get in. And so she was like, yeah, but you got to get an SAT score of this. And I was like, don't worry, I'm going to get in. And so I remember at that time, I don't know if they still do them in person interviews. I did an in person interview, and a woman was like, don't worry, you're gonna get in. And so it was the irony of it. She said exactly what I always said. And so I went to Fordham University, and Greg, it was the most shocking thing I've ever experienced in my life, culture shock. I had no idea that I was going to a Jesuit university. I had no idea I was going to a predominantly white university because, in my head, how could that possibly
Right.
be at Fordham University, where there's all these Blacks and Hispanics? And I was a part of a class that had the most diversity, and it was only 3%. And that was
Wow.
including all of the nationalities and
Wow.
races. So it was very shocking to me. I spent a lot of time illegally in off campus housing with a friend of mine who had an apartment in Little Italy. And for the first time in my life, I experienced extreme racism.
Really?
Yeah, extreme
Yeah.
racism. And I didn't really know how to handle it. I was just like, what is going on? What did I do? And so once again, I was like, I knew that a lot of people didn't want me there, and it felt that way from students, staff, and the professors were wonderful to us, but some of the students didn't want us there. And that just drove me. I was like, okay, you want
Yeah.
me, you don't want me here, but I'm going to stay here. Just if
Wow.
it's just to piss you off. So I wind up being the president of our International Black Student Union is probably by my sophomore year. And then in the middle of my sophomore year, I got pregnant. And I remember the Jesuits telling me, you can't stay here. And I was like, you can't stay here pregnant. And I'm like, what is going on? This is insane. And so I left for a year, but I said, I already spent 2 years at this school.
Mhm.
You guys owe me a degree. And so I went back after being out for a year. And my last year, I think I did full time work and I did night school. And so it was an interesting dynamic, right? I went from being this Black girl from the Bronx in Fordham University, with predominantly white students, all up very upper class, and pretty much a lot of well-off students,
Yeah.
right? And then I went to night school on the same campus, and I was on campus with a lot of minorities
Mhm.
and working people, and it was just such a different culture. And so I think that told me right there is culture is not about the environment. Don't ever assume, right? Going to Fordham and finding out was predominantly white, and then going to night school and finding a whole different experience is that you can't make assumptions about culture based on the environment. And
Mhm.
so it was just definitely interesting and a learning experience. And even for the students I went to school with, because they were like, wait a minute, she just got here and she's graduating. What's going on? And they're like, oh no, I took my 3 years already.
Right.
And to learn from them and for them to learn from me, it was interesting. And I made some really good friends there during my time there. And it was fun. It was a whole different experience, but it was
Yeah.
fun.
I want to go back to something you said also when you said you first got there, you experienced the racism, and then you thought, what did I do wrong? Or what did I do? Let me
Yeah.
ask you, how long did it take you to realize it wasn't you, it was them? And what was that transformation at that point?
I think it was very early on because coming from a public high school where I was deemed top 10% of my class, I struggled academically at Fordham because I'm like, so now I'm competing with the big dogs, and I'm like,
Right.
oh, I'm always smart. So I actually had to study. I actually put some effort in it. And I realized very early on that I had to find my community and I had to find
Mhm.
it fast. Don't get me wrong, there were some students who were very
Yeah.
welcoming, but that just wasn't I didn't feel welcome. I didn't feel at home. And it was partly because of some of my own insecurities coming in and struggling a little bit academically up front. But I had to find my community. And I remember what they called Eddie's Parade. It was just like the big grass lawn. And I was out there and they had all the groups there. And I'm like, I'm a commuter, right? And this
Mhm.
school has commuters, but it has people are staying on campus. So I'm a commuter. And I'm like, I don't have time for this. I got to do this. I got to do that. And I remember two students grabbing me and was like, look, you look lost. Come over here. And that was the International Black Student Union. And that's where I met a ton of folks in my community and my support. And I thought it was really important to stay connected with them because number one, they were struggling. Most of the minority students were commuters. We had a few that dormed and things like that. So they helped us out, like we were late night. They would let us stay in their rooms and things like that. And people had meal plans if you were hungry because we were all broke. Hey, I
Right.
met some of the basketball team who had unlimited meal plans. So I would actually draw pictures on the wall to make money for them. If you could just know what kind of pictures that athletes would want you to draw on the wall. So I was like, hey, I draw a picture on the wall for you, and then you give me a free meal. So I just learned really fast that if I was going to be successful there, I had to find a community because number one, at in my high school, I was very protected and I was honored, I was respected. And that's important to me to be respected. I think when you grow up with not having a lot, and I try to get teachers and other people to understand when you grow up poor, all you have is your respect
Right.
and
Right.
your intelligence because you have nothing else. And a lot of teachers would say to me, hey, why did I get so upset about these little things? Like you have so much.
Yeah.
All they have is respect. And so I just really knew that was important to me to be respected and to be seen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for people to see me for not what's on the outside, but to really see what's up in here. I've always felt like I was smart and I always felt like I had a lot to bring to the table, but a lot of times, if the table's not there, you don't see that. And it's all about opportunities. That's what we're talking about in this new era is having the opportunity. And so I just knew that if I was going to be successful there, I had to find my village and my
Yeah.
community and whatever that was going to be.
Yeah, I agree. When I went to Baylor, I was one of the poor students as well. And I remember my sophomore year, my girlfriend from the meal plan, she would just stick sandwiches in her purse because I didn't have enough money. She brought me food for a couple of months. That's the only way I ate. But I also, like you, I did needed to find my group. And I don't know. I also believe that you have to stick with it until you do. I always
Hmm.
believe that that shows up, but it usually doesn't show up in the time frame we want it to.
Yeah.
And I found that as I pushed through that hard part, then that's you're rewarded for it. But most people don't want to push through the hard part. And I know that was had to be difficult, but you knew you needed to find it. Yeah, because at first I didn't find my group. And then when I finally did, I felt at home.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and I think people forget about that human connection, right? They
Yeah.
think you just they think things are just going to happen and things will work themselves out. And I think we forget that we're human. We
Yeah.
need a little piece of home, whatever home means for you, right? We
Right.
really need a piece of home. We need people to value us. We need to
Right.
be seen. We need to be heard. We need to feel important and we need to feel valued. And if we don't, then there's no space for that person. So I take all of those life lessons in what I do now. And that's
Mhm.
exactly what I do now is trying to get people in leadership and organizations to see how do we make people feel valued, respected, seen, and heard.
Yeah.
And in this, hopefully we're not coming out of it too much because I'm enjoying in this job market where people are calling the shots, employees are calling the shots. I love it because this is the time where people, organizations like, oh, maybe we need to listen.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to be more in tune to what people want, not just about what we want. It balances the scales. I know it's not going to last for long, but maybe there's some lessons to be learned. And I love what I do because of that, because I take all of those experiences and I
Yeah.
say, how this was important to me. It was important to me back in, I'm going to show my age now in the 90s, and it's still important to me. It's still important to me to understand what makes people tick and what motivates people and what makes them feel valued and respected.
Yeah. And that's going to be my next question. Have you rolled that out in your career? And I see you have just by what you're doing. But that's another thing just want to mention. Business is always going to view from the lens of profit.
Right.
And rightfully, that's what a business is for. But I think business has been blind to the cost of not doing some of those things because it does add to the bottom line, because just think about when you are in a community you care about, you give that discretionary effort because you're on a team, because you care about that. It's not just for the paycheck, because one of the things people say is that 70% of the people want to have friendships at their place of work. That's where the connection is. And again, I'd rather work with friends toward a common goal than, but there's something that allows me, okay, I'll stay a little later. I'll do something extra here because I'm a part of a team. I'm part of a community.
And you know what I think that organizations need to understand? If there was one thing I want organizations to understand is that this is not your grandfather's organization. You're not bringing in 50-year-olds. You're bringing in 20-year-olds,
Yeah,
and their value system is totally different. It
very
doesn't
different.
mean it's better or better or worse. It's just different. And the things that we valued, when I'm growing up, my mom and dad preached to me about get a job, get stable, get your 401k. At that time, they were talking about pensions. I have yet to have a pension in any place I've ever worked. So things are different, but they value these young folks coming in. They want to make sure that their value system matches the value system of their organization. That really means something to them. And I think they forget that. And because they have more control, they're in the driver's seat of their careers, they have more options. And I always talk about this in any meeting I have. I look at my children, I have an adult who's going to be 30, and my son who just started is a freshman in college. And I've watched him during the pandemic, before the pandemic. My daughter sell things. Like it was a time that he would sell anything that wasn't nailed down. I'm like, what happened to your father's back massage? Oh, I sold it on. They have another stream of income. This social media has given them another stream of income. They don't have to do 9 to 5. I've known so many young people that make money with outside of being a 9 to 5. And they don't look at things the way we look at them. So when we have this job shortage, when we have people, we don't have enough candidates for roles, we have to start looking at that. What's important to them? And
Right.
so when we're talking about not having a table, they want to, even if that's not their demographic, they want to see a table where their friends can be included. And they
Right.
want to see a table where everyone could be included. And they think about things differently. So we have to start thinking about things differently. And
Yeah.
not only that, all of our customers, because they think differently, our customers are thinking differently, right?
Right.
And I work at Cushman and Wakefield, and the biggest thing they want to know is that if we're thinking about the environment, sustainability, and we're thinking about DE&I, what our DE&I efforts are like. And development, they want to know that we have career programs for all of our people. These are things that are important. And I didn't see the stress on that before, the focus on that, that's a better word, as much maybe 20 years ago as I do now. And that's a wonderful thing. It's
Yeah.
a beautiful
Well,
thing.
I also believe that's part of because of communication, internet, all of that. I think people at one level probably had that throughout 40, 50 years, but we didn't have the exposure of those ideas. We didn't have
Good
all of that
point.
information so quickly being disseminated and put out there for everyone to see. That's the thing I do like about if you get the information, not rather than disinformation. I love that piece of the internet because I believe you can't hide stuff. I
Right.
think,
Everything's exposed.
yeah, many times over time, people, it's going to be exposed. It's going to be put out there. If you're not doing your job, it's going to show. It really will. It's going to, and you can't really hide it anymore. Okay. Just
Yeah.
like those other things. And I think it's important that if I want to get truth out there, I have to have the information, not the disinformation that goes along with it. That's the
Yeah,
bothers me.
that's it's the internet is a double-edged sword, right?
Yeah,
You can
it
get
is.
misinformation, but you can also get truth and you get
Yeah.
exposure.
Yeah.
And I always tell my daughter, I was like, oh my God, I don't know how you guys live underneath this microscope. That's my cross to bear because she's like, it's nothing. This is a
Right,
part of
just
it.
that's
And
how it is.
I always am fearful. I'm like, oh, be careful what you put on there. She goes, no, this is if I want truth, I got to be truthful. I was
Right.
like, okay, out of
Yeah.
the mouths of babes,
Yeah.
you've been taught me something.
That's great. Well, Keisha, as we finish up, what is an inspirational message you would like to leave or an inspirational story you would like to leave our listeners with just to get them through the day or something that has inspired you to move through your career, make the choices you have? What would you like to share? Anything in particular?
I don't know if there is one particular ideology I live by, but I do, and it may sound cliche, I live by karma. I truly believe in karma. I grew up in a house where my parents allowed me to pick my own religion. So my grandmother was a Jehovah's Witness, and my father was an Episcopalian, and my mother wasn't very religious. And then I started going to school and met a girl who was a Baptist. I went to Baptist church in Harlem and for 4 years. So I don't really know what religion I too, however, what I do know in all of that religion through my grandmother is that do unto others as you want to be treated. And I do feel that way. I sometimes if I come out human and I make mistakes and I treat someone badly, I correct it. I self-correct because I'm like, I would not want someone to treat me that way. Or more importantly, I always say treat people like you want people to treat your children
Yeah.
or your mother or your father, the people you hold dear. And I do believe that, right? So when I see things at work where I see people, this is what kind of leads me to feedback as a gift. I
Mhm.
genuinely, I'm known as truth to power, right? I want to get feedback. I embrace it because a lot of times, especially being a Black woman, I don't think we get told the truth. And I don't think that people are afraid to tell you the truth about how you perceived. And I think it's important to give back, right? To pull people's coattails and say, hey, this is what people say about you when you're not in the room, because careers are made when you're not in the room. And I've known that very early. Someone told me, and I can't remember who it was. So you have to solicit feedback and
Yeah.
you have to give feedback if you care. If you say you care, you have to give feedback, even if it's scary
Yeah.
and it's confrontation. I love confrontation because I think you learn. That's where you learn. That's where you grow. That's where you're challenged.
Yeah.
But it's something that Crucial Conversation says all the time.
Yeah.
You can be honest and respectful.
Yeah.
It's not an or. And that's really what I live. Be honest and respectful to people. And I think that goes a long way.
Kisha, that is so beautiful because I agree with you completely. I believe honesty builds trust and it builds the
Can you say that
relationship.
again?
Honesty does build trust. Anything else doesn't. And
Right.
many times feedback can be hard. I would suggest valuable feedback probably is hard because in that conflict is where we sharpen ourselves. But you have to have the ability to look at yourself, just like you were saying, and improve that. When you not be perfect, there is no perfection. There's just improvement. Kisha, you have inspired me talking about this today. Thank you so
Thank you.
much. I appreciate you being on, and hopefully we'll get to do another episode down the road.
I
So
love it. I love it. I love this stuff. This is what inspires me and keeps my juices flowing. Because today is my day off and I have to get my juices flowing. So
I love that. Kisha, thanks so much for being a guest. And everyone else, thank you so much for listening in. And I'll see you next time on A Shot of Inspiration. Bye-bye. Thanks for listening to this episode of A Shot of Inspiration. If you like this or any of our other episodes, make sure you rate it and share it with a friend. This is Greg Stevens, and we look forward to being with you next time. Until then, be bold, be courageous, and respectfully speak your truth.